I want to remind everyone about the practice of dana. Um, so in Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. And dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely. And this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. And other ways to practice dana are to offer support to those who share the teachings, such as Reverend Rendo. The teachers don't get compensated by Great Tree, so they're they're practicing dana, so you can support them by offering dana to them, and you can support places of spiritual practice such as Great Tree. And another way to practice dana is to just give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. So those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis. So please support their practice by giving what you can. And you can either do this directly or through Great Tree, and then Great Tree will then pass it on to them. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Anne, who will introduce our speaker here.
We're very happy to welcome Reverend Rendo Jonathan Flum today, whose talk is called Death, Birth, and Thumb Tips Touching Sorrow and Joy. Reverend Rendo is a Soto Zen monk. He ordained at Great Tree in the spring of 2011 under the guidance and teaching of Reverend Tejo. Rendo has been married for 25 years and has 2 teenagers. He's a writer and has spent a good chunk of time as a milkman. His business of distributing the dairy products of the Amish in North Carolina operates out of Asheville and Charlotte. And over the course of the pandemic, he converted his kids' old playhouse into a tiny temple. You can learn more about that project and other oddities at his website, which is www.ashevilletemple.org. So now, Reverend Rendo.
Thanks so much, Anne, and thanks, Trey. And just to mention everything Trey said about dana, and any dana that would be donated today would just go straight to Great Tree Zen Temple. So thanks so much for being here. And am I being heard okay? Okay. Okay, great. So in the course of the talk, it sounds like we have 40 minutes. So if we're getting close to getting cut off, I'll try not to, hopefully we'll do it at a period rather than a comma and then log back on. It might take me a minute to get back on, but I'll be back to complete the talk. So I want to tell today 4 personal stories of my experience over, I guess I'll be talking about a 10-year period, about my experience of a death, a birth, and how I found how that impacted my own practice and how I better understood the mudra. So I've always been taken by the phrase cosmic mudra, how we make a space for the cosmic in our very human, very temporal, at times very strong and at times very fragile hands. In the cosmic mudra, there's emptiness, there's infinite possibility, there's infinite compassion, there's open space. And I want to take this next piece of time to explore a little bit what this open space is holding. And finally, in the course of the talk, I want to place this in the context of the triple treasure, how Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are all contained in this cosmic mudra, and they seem to hold us even within the physicality of our own hands. One of the phrases I'm going to use today isn't a Buddhist phrase. As far as I know, it's a nautical phrase. And the phrase that came up for me is steady as she goes. And this phrase are the words a ship captain gives to the helmsman of a ship to keep the ship heading steadily on the same course, regardless of gusts of winds or cross currents. So pay attention to that phrase, steady as she goes. The other word I want to return to is the word resolve. And the way I'll use the word resolve as a quality of mind and of practice, to simply have resolve. I'm differentiating the kind of resolve from the way we traditionally resolve a problem through calculation and compromise, but rather to have resolve in our practice is not to solve problems per se. It is to have the resolve to live with what seems to be unsolvable problems, by keeping our direction steady as she goes. So that's the kind of themes I want to draw out in these stories I'm going to share with you. The first story is a story about the death of my grandfather. I was really close with my grandfather. I don't know those of you who have been fortunate enough to know your grandparents and grow close with them. I'm going to give a talk at some point, which is just going to go really um, in kind of a deep way about my grandfather and who he was, and some of the things I learned from him. But I can tell you that I adored my grandfather, and he adored me, and especially as a young boy, like when he would come to visit my house on the weekends, and he came every weekend, I couldn't wait. I just ran out of the house and I ran to his car, and I just couldn't wait for him to get out to jump into his arms. And one of the things that we did, and my grandmother allowed, and I think was so happy that we were so close, is I had in my bedroom, I had a trundle bed. I had a bed under my bed that can then pull out, and you can pick up, and it can be at the same height. So if you had a sleepover or something like that, and when my grandfather came to visit, he'd sleep in that bed, and we'd sleep side by side. He'd tell me stories at night, all about how he grew up in New York, in a tenement with his brothers, and so much about his life. About having an iceman and a milkman. I mean, so many things. The very the reason I ultimately I wanted to try being a milkman was because of one of his stories. So I just adored him, and I it's so long ago, but I remember saying it. And of course, my mom and dad remind me of it because they remember always me saying it when I was so young, and they were wondering, where is this coming from? But one of the things I would say to my grandfather, because I adored him so much, I called him Pop. I said, Pop, I just wish you were my age. I just wish we were the same age, so we can live the same amount of time. And when I die, you would die. It would just be done, but we'd have our whole lives together. I don't like that you're so much older than me. And that always made him laugh, and he thought it was so funny that at that young age I had that thought, that I just wished, I loved that he was my grandfather, but I also thought of him as my best friend, and I wish we were the same age. And of course, that wish couldn't come true. He was my grandfather, so he was quite a bit older than me. And right around the time that my son is 19 now, and right around the time my wife got pregnant with my first child, my son, my grandfather started to get pretty sick. He was 85. He started to have some issues, and he was living in Florida at the time. And I would fly back a little bit, back and forth to see him for surgery, or stay a little bit for recovery, and help my grandmother and be with him, and just really want to be at his side, just really want to see his face, and him see my face, and hear him, and be with him. That's just what I wanted to do. Uh, and as my wife got more and more pregnant, I also needed to be with my wife, and do my job. I was living here in Asheville, North Carolina, and I would drive back and forth some. Um, and I just kept sort of watching that timing. And then it became very close to when my son was going to be born, to his due date. And my wife was very big pregnant, feeling very much ready. And but about a week before my son was born, my grandfather died. And then he, because he's from New York and his cemetery plot was in New York, his body was being flown to New York. And we always thought at the death, I would do the eulogy, and I would be there, and want to be with him, at his funeral. But it was very close to my son's birth, so I couldn't be there, because my son was going to be born, and I didn't know exactly what day. My wife was having natural childbirth. Nothing was being induced. We didn't have a date. So there was great uncertainty, and there was the fear that if I went to New York to the funeral, I could possibly miss the birth, which would be unthinkable for me, and I thought also for my grandfather. I really felt my grandfather say, "No, it's a birth, and that you have to be there. I'll I'm okay, you know." But one of the things that happened on the day of my grandfather's funeral is I really wanted to have some kind of funeral for him here in Asheville, whatever I can do. And I was, my grandfather is Jewish, and I grew up Jewish, and still have a strong connection to Judaism. Also, obviously, have a strong connection to Buddhism. But I knew my grandfather wouldn't necessarily understand a Buddhist ceremony, though I thought it was significant for him. But I also thought, well, we have to have a Jewish ceremony also for him, and say Kaddish for him, which is a central prayer that Jews say for the dead. And they say that prayer for 11 months when it's a close relative, say it every day. So I asked the Sangha of Zen Center of Asheville. There was no great tree at that time, but Tejo was still a teacher at Zen Center of Asheville. If everyone could come, and come at 6 a.m, like we usually were coming to sit, and it was often a small group coming at 6. But I asked for at least 10 people to come, and of course more came than 10. But in Judaism, you need 10 to be able to say that prayer together, to have what's called a minyan. And even though we were in a Buddhist Zen context, I wanted to have that also for my grandfather. So many people came, and we sat together, and I really felt the very kind of palpability in my mudra at that time. Just everyone sitting with me in my grief for my grandfather, and my unsolvable problem that I was waiting for a birth, but missing my grandfather's funeral, who I love so much. Uh, and everybody was there with me, and I felt the power of the sitting. And then after the sitting, we chanted the Heart Sutra, which very slowly, and of course it's very powerful because so much of it is about birth and death, and that there is no birth, there is no death, and non-attachment to these things. And then we went right into, with my grandfather's picture on the altar, chanting the Kaddish in Hebrew, which I did, and Sangha said Amen at different times when I said Amen, and were with me, and this was a way for me to be steady as she goes, somehow to be steady, somehow to have resolve, because of the one of the triple treasures, the Sangha was very much with me. And when I couldn't be at the funeral with my family in New York, I was able to have this this kind of funeral right there, right, and right here in Zen Center. And for some reason, I just remember that palpability right there in my hands, right there in the mudra, just sort of holding something and being held. And I felt my grandfather there, and I really felt his appreciation, and everyone in that room's appreciation for him, even though they didn't know him. And then this leads me right into the next story of birth, where 1 week later, my wife went into labor, and she was having a natural childbirth. We didn't expect any problems. No one goes in expecting problems. She labored for a very long time. She labored some at home. Then we went to the hospital to meet the midwife at about 6 a.m. And she labored all day without any medication. And she was incredibly strong, and she was in great pain. And it so happened to be that this was the midwife's. She said, "It's the busiest day I've ever had. If you guys are okay, I'm just gonna kind of leave you alone here." And she was checking on other people, and it was a very busy maternity floor that day. And we were alone for a lot of the day. It was just the two of us. And it's one of those things that obviously for my wife was unbelievably transformative in a way I can't fully understand, but I witnessed it. And I know at different times throughout the day, just seeing her just pure physical pain and arduous work, it just very naturally brought me to tears. There was no other way around it. And it was just amazing to see a human being work so hard to bring another human being into the world. When she finally was giving birth to my son, something was going wrong. I didn't understand at the time what or why, but my son had trouble coming out of there. We found out later he had swallowed some meconium. He had been in the womb too long. Maybe there should have been an intervention. Whatever, there wasn't. The midwife really struggled. We went from just myself and my wife in the room and the midwife in the room to then many other doctors and nurses in the room trying to get this baby out. When the baby was born, my son was born, he wasn't breathing right away. They got him to breathe, but very weakly. I never really heard him cry in that moment, just kind of gentle, almost like a little barks, kind of like almost like a like a little dog trying to breathe. So immediately the room was very busy, very chaotic, with lots of machines, and they said, we're going to have to take him away. We're going to take him to the NICU. We're going to work on him and get him going. They had tubes in him very quickly, and they were going to do whatever they can do to make sure he can get breathing correctly and okay and on his own, and that he was going to be okay. So after that full day of labor, then they whisked him away to the NICU. And my wife, of course, was still in unbelievable pain, and was starting to hemorrhage. And they doctors said, "Oh, we can't get your placenta out. There was so much going on in there, and you labored for so long. Your placenta has adhered to the uterine wall, and we can't get it. We can't deliver it naturally. We're gonna have to take you in surgery. Mr. Flaum, would you sign this consent form? We're gonna have to put her under general anesthetic, take her to surgery, and right now, so okay, I signed it. In being in that labor room for about 12 hours, just sort of my wife and I for most of the day, all of a sudden my son was born. He was whisked away to one part of the hospital. Then my wife, who was very determined to have natural childbirth, all of a sudden now she has to have surgery to remove her placenta, and she's taken out of the room. And then all the doctors and the machines go out of the room. And somebody says to me, I said, can I go with my wife? She said, no, we have to take her in surgery. You just stay here, and we'll come for you. We'll let you know when you can either see your wife or see your son, whichever comes first. We'll let you know, but there's nothing you can do right now. Just stay here, and we'll come for you. So I said, okay. And then some custodians came in and mopped up the room, and changed the bed, put some new pillows in there, and left. And then this very loud room where a birth had just happened, my son had just been born, who we had been anticipating, um, uh, was not in the room, and my wife was not in the room. She was in surgery. He was in the NICU, and all the planning that we had done. My wife had such a nice, elaborate birth plan and for how everything would go, and that she'd be nursing her child right now in the bed, etc. Now that was gone, and it was just this present moment. And it was one of those times where I didn't even think about what to do. I just heard that instruction from, I guess it was a nurse that said, we'll come and get you when you can see one of them. But for now, just stay here. So I didn't really think about what to do, but I knew that kind custodial person had just put in some new pillows. So all I did was turn around and gather up some pillows and make a makeshift kind of zafu and zabuton and put it on the floor. And I just sat down in this posture with my mudra. And I remember just kind of shaking there when I was sitting, but just coming to some kind of stability. And I remember at that time very clearly a thought, kind of a voice coming up in my head, which felt very much not like my own, but a very kind of direct, caring voice, a voice that was trying to kind of give me resolve and steady me, just steady me as I was going down that ocean right there. And I'll paraphrase what my experience was of that directive. And that was, as I tried to remember it, what I came up with was this: tragic things happen every day. You're no different than anybody else. You're not separate from every other person and every other event. Just relax. This is how to be in this situation. Other people from all times and places have been in situations just like this. You're not alone. And for some reason, this allowed me to steady my mind to not wander around into all the possibilities that may be or may not be happening in these moments where my control was completely suspended, if I ever had any in the first place. But it was a clear indication of something going on in my life that I cared about the most. There were two people I cared about the most, my wife and now my new son. And I wanted to help them more than I wanted to do anything in the world. And at that moment, I had no control to do that. And some caring kind of voice came to me that said, but you're not alone in that. Many, many people have been in situations just like this. And many, many people are in situations just like this right now. Right now as we're talking, but right now being then for me. When I was sitting, I knew in that moment other people right now were with me. And somehow it, things steadied enough to be able to just sit in the posture, to be able to just have the mudra in front of me like I've had it in front of me before. And somehow that was resolve, that was steadying, just to stay, just to try to stay in the seat long enough until something else could be seen, and to keep coming back to this idea that I wasn't alone, and that this everything that was happening, and I can just be with what was happening without racing to what might happen later. Just be with what is happening now. And I was sitting there for what felt like a long time. It turned out maybe it was about 2 hours, until a nurse opened the door and came in and touched my shoulder. And I looked up and she said, your wife's in recovery. She's okay. She's in recovery. And I said, and my first response was, that's great. How about my son? And I said, well, he's out of the woods. He's in the NICU. He's breathing on his own. He's out of the woods. We're watching him and be there, but we think he's going to be okay. So, okay. I went and saw my wife, and by that night, we saw our son together. And again, during that during those moments, it's the reason I'm recounting these stories. It'll be 20 years. My son will be 20 this year. 20 years later, Zazen really worked. It really came through. That mudra really came through. In that moment, the Sangha became much wider, and I really felt the Buddha supporting me and sitting with me, and that Dharma coming up and saying to me, uh, "Steady as she goes." Uh, to this, the third story I want to share with you happened right here in this room, which is nice. And it was at a sesshin, 5-day sesshin. I think 5. I don't know if it was 5 or 7, but some years ago, I don't know how many, but yeah, it was before I ordained, so maybe 12 years ago, something like that. And it was the last night of the sesshin, and we're at the end of the day of sesshin, each day you read Fukan Zazengi, and I was the main doan for the sesshin, so I was leading the reading of Fukan Zazengi at the end, and I was reading this. And this is really exhaustion had set in, as it often does at sesshin when you're working very hard. And I was reading in the place where you practice, spread out some thick matting and place a round cushion on top. Sit on the cushion with your legs crossed, either full lotus posture or the half lotus. This means place your right foot on your left thigh and your left foot on your right thigh. Loosen your robes and belt, keeping them neat. Then put your right palm up on your left foot and put your left hand in the palm of your right, the thumb tips lightly touching. Find your posture leaning neither to right or left, forward or back. Your ears should be aligned with your shoulders, and from the front, your nose in a direct line with your navel. Place your tongue against the roof of your mouth, keeping mouth and lips closed. Your eyes should be open, and you should breathe gently through your nose. So, you know how in sesshin you do the Fukan Zazengi every night, and often, especially when I started this practice, I said, "Man, why are we doing it every night? I already know it. I've heard it so many times. Boy, if I have to hear the Fukan Zazengi one more time, I'm going to lose it. If I have to repeat it after a 15-hour day of zazen, man, I just really want to go to sleep. I can't believe we have to do Fukan Zazengi after all this." And even so, shouldn't we just do it first thing in the morning? You're giving me zazen instructions after I just did zazen all day. Now you tell me how to do zazen. I wish you had told me earlier. Then I would know something about zazen. So I always had those kind of things in my mind, and this night when I got to the part thumb tips lightly touching, I didn't say it that way. I said thumb tips lightly touching. And I saw, you're facing the wall in zazen, and I saw next to me a smile on someone's face, just a little bit, just out of the corner, that kind of smiling at my mistake. And for whatever reason, that gave me the giggles really bad. I just started laughing, and I couldn't stop. And when my grandfather was the same way. Like when I start to laugh, I have a really big laugh, and it's really it's infectious. And before I knew it, we had a crowded sesshin. The whole room just erupts. And this is it was a very, as I remember, very intense, very kind of strict vibe in the sesshin. Everyone really doing their job to maintain silence, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this huge laughter, and Tejo also, and everybody, and it finally settled down, and finally, after some start-stops and breaking up in laughter again, we finally got through Fukan Zazengi. But it was like this unbelievable. It was such an energy in this room. It was like the thing was. It was just shaking with belly laughs. It was really, really, really funny for some reason. And it was I made a mistake, but that was really funny. And I remember then we got ready for bed and it cleaned up and, so forth. And he went downstairs to go to bed and, came out of the bathroom, brushed my teeth, whatever, was getting in pajamas for bed. And someone came up to me who I wish I can remember who it was. And, but I don't. I haven't seen him at Great Tree much before or something. But someone came to me and said, I've been at so many sessions and I've been into sessions in New York and here and there, and I've been here too. Boy, that was the most fun I ever had in the Zendo. That was so great. That was real helpful to me. Thank you. And I remember because when he first came up to me, I said, "Oh no, this is a very serious practitioner, and he's gonna, maybe give me some advice or just scold me a little bit, or whatever, because I broke his silence and his kind of flow by my silliness." But it was just the opposite. He really kind of embraced my mistake, and I remember feeling just really genuine love coming from him, and really joy in his face, where his face had been, very serious and very somber for the 5 days. And that really filled me with joy. Um, and you know I want to say something about joy. I've spoken about some sorrow here with my grandfather and difficulty of birth, and then the great joy of birth also, and the great joy when people recover. But the joy of everyone in the room having so much resolve for 5 days and being so steady as they go. Sometimes steadiness falls off. Sometimes it falls off from difficulty, but sometimes steadiness falls off from great joy, and that great joy can be received as a gift. And ironically enough, it was received right in the mudra, right, right in Fukan Zazengi, and talking about thumb tips lightly touching, and you wonder, is it an accident or not, or is it's just a happy accident, um, that this field of effort mixed with love, it holds up. uh, and I discovered something else about the cosmic mudra that stayed with me, that it can really produce great joy and great laughter. So that also stays in my mudra, and that also was made possible by the wonderful sangha. If I was just by myself and made the mistake, I might have just gone on. But because I saw that girl next to me, just one little lift of her mouth she couldn't quite control, just to smile, it touched it, and then it touched everybody. So again, just that connection of sangha, it can connect with something like ringing the bell and bowing simultaneously, and like cleaning your chopsticks at oryoki, but it can connect with the spontaneity of laughter, and that too is holy. um, and the last story, hopefully I'll get it in before we run out of time on the Zoom. Um, this last story is a story of being in Dokusan some years after my son was born, and then my daughter was born. They were young, maybe, my son is 19, will be 20. My daughter's 15 and will be 16 this year. At the time, maybe my daughter was 2.5, something like that, as I recall. Um, and I was in Dokuzan with Tejo, and I was in great pain at the time, because at that time, my wife, who made a full recovery, but at that time had a very serious cancer and was going through cancer treatment. And I was very worried. I was very worried about her cancer treatment. I was very worried about my young children. I felt like I wasn't doing enough for them. I was worried about my work and my finances, because I couldn't focus. I wasn't a milkman at that time. I was doing something else. where it's a sort of more high pressure and responsibilities, and I had trouble focusing, giving everything that was going on. And I sort of just spilled all of this out, my great concerns about my wife's health, my what I thought was my insufficiencies to take care of my children as well as I wanted to, and my concerns about work, and I just sort of laid it out there in Dokusan. And I remember feeling great fear, great anxiety, um, uh, just kind of shaking in my body with all of this, not being steady, not feeling steady, and lacking some resolve, forgetting my resolve for just a moment. Um, um, and I don't remember much of what Tejo said in that Dokusan, but I remember something that really stayed with me, and it's a long time ago already. But when I think about it, it could have just happened yesterday, because we were sitting across from each other, and Tejo said, "Do you see your mudra?" And and I looked down and I saw my mudra was way off. My thumb tips weren't lightly touching. I don't think they were touching at all. It was kind of cockeyed. It was way off. So my posture was way off. And she said, "Well, fix it." And the way she said, "Well, fix it," it was kind of the way a kindergarten teacher would tell their student to just fix a button on their shirt that they just learned how to button. It was done with in a very direct way and a very kind way. So I did. I fixed it. Yeah, I fixed my mudra, and my posture, and she fixed hers even more, and fixed her posture even more, and we just sat there, uh, doing zazen together, and in that, my experience there was she kind of threw me a tether. Her boat threw my boat a rope for a minute there, and just steadied me without um, having to put it in words, because it's hard to put in words when you're trying to steady someone. Um, but just her mudra helped steady my mudra, and her posture helped steady my posture. And we sat um, until the bell rang. And we sat, and Buddha can be present. The Buddha way can come back in the room, and my um, concerns can just float there, can just be there in the room. They don't have to overtake the room, and they don't have to be uh, shunned from the room, or something to be ashamed of, to have a deep human concerns and anxiety, but just to somehow have the help of being steady. And one thing I want to say about that is that my experience was that nothing at all was solved, but the thumb tips touched as Dogen instructed, and something imperceptibly was made right. This absolute devotion to sitting, to the school of Zen, had manifested itself. The Fukan Zazengi was now before me in this room in a quite serious way, in a way I needed it, in a way I realized I needed to be reminded of it, and hear it every night, and remember, just continue to remember that simplicity. Um, Resolve came up in me, though my problems and sorrows at the time still felt unsolvable. I sat in my turbulence and felt the waves and wind, and also felt in the room the presence of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, steadying me, just kind of reining me in, throwing me a line to keep my boat from flipping over, hitching it to theirs in order to remind me that calm was still possible, even now, even in this moment, even for the next moment. Steady as she goes was the message. Just steady, just hold on and breathe. Hold the mudra in place. Just come back to this place where you're holding the mudra. Just keep coming back to it again and again and again. To conclude and then open for questions, I'll just read this concluding statement and say a word and then I'll open it up. It's a gift to have a spiritual friend. It's a bounty to have spiritual friends in the plural and have Sangha. It's a gift to have access to the Dharma. It's a gift that the Buddha way seems to carry you forward when you've lost your own way. The Buddha way is resolve. It's steady. It's ultimately joyful. It is as simple as spreading out thick matting, setting a cushion upon it, and taking the backward step to think about not thinking. It's your own two thumb tips lightly touching, and it's the cosmic and completely unquantifiable, infinite compassion and comfort. You think you can only hold what you can fit in your own hand sometimes, but this is delusion. You can hold more because you're being held by Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. But to be held, you have to let go, have the resolve to enter the path of practice, and trust that even you, exactly you, exactly you as you are in this moment, can go into big ocean steady as she goes. So all of these experiences, my own little personal experience, and we all have experiences like these with a death or a birth or great laughter or great fear and anxiety that we're not adequate to the task at hand. Somehow we continue, and it's a matter of how we continue. Can we continue with steadiness and with trusting something bigger than our own thoughts about what we can do? And can we come back to the mudra, that open space, and allow Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha to come in and help us to steady and to have resolve until the next moment. So.